Welcome, everybody. And today I'm with Katie Crooks, an amazing person who I found on Instagram. I think it was during lockdown. Later in the episode, you'll notice I say that we had recorded a podcast episode together about using hypnosis to learn English more effectively. But then I remembered that that was incorrect because during lockdown, that's when I was really into this app called Clubhouse. She and I actually did a special session there. It was on Clubhouse. It wasn't an episode that was recorded to the podcast. And it's kind of funny because every time that Katie and I get together, we just can't stop talking because we're just building off of each other and what we've said. And, that's kind of a blessing and a curse because today we had planned on talking about 4 key points of this book that we both love called Freeing the Natural Voice by Kristen Linklater. Well, 4 points turned into 2 points because we just kept realizing how interconnected everything is. So we keep kind of going off tangents, but it's fascinating, I promise. And we really go into depth about these 2 things. Number 1, tensions and habits surrounding holding patterns of our language. And then number 2, breath and supporting your speaking kind of from within rather than pronunciation being the starting point. So now let's get on with the show. I'm Bianca, your personal American accent coach, and I'm here to help you master an American accent in English because your voice is your choice when it comes to how you sound. I try to release a podcast episode every 2 weeks, and so you should really subscribe to whatever podcast platform you use so that you don't miss the newest episode. And by the way, if you want to see the full video of the episode, it's available at Accent Coach Bianca on YouTube. Now, let's get on with the show. Hey, Katie, how have you been? I'm so excited to see you because it's been like maybe 2 years since we last did a podcast episode and we keep saying, oh my God, we got to do a follow-up. We got to do a follow-up. How have you been?
Oh my gosh, we keep saying that. And finally, here we are. I've been really well. Life is exciting in so many ways.
You've got a lot going on, I think, lately, right? Because it's been hard for us to get together. But for those of our audience who don't know you, maybe a quick introduction is in order because that last episode was a long time ago.
That last episode was a very long time ago. And so much has changed since then in the way I'm serving, in the people I'm serving, at the levels I'm serving. It's bonkers. So to give you a bit of backstory, I used to be a voice coach. And then over the years, I started to notice all of this stuff for people coming up that made me think I've got to become a hypnotherapist. So I'm now a hypnotherapist, full-blown hypnotherapy. I'm not really a voice coach anymore, although voice informs so much of my work that it's very hard to untangle the work between the 2 things.
And that's actually, if people don't know from the last episode from so long ago, but we did an episode together. Specifically, I found you on Instagram because I was looking for people that were in the space of kind of language and voice, but something adjacent to that. And I found you and it was perfect. So at the time, we did a whole episode on hypnotherapy specifically to help people who speak English as a second language, right?
That's right. Yes, it was to help people speaking English as a second language and help them to tap into more relaxed states so that their brain could learn more easily. Because neural pathways form in the brain, i.e. we learn new habits when we're more relaxed.
Exactly. And then recently, I think it was just last week, we got this together pretty quick. I was looking at your Instagram because I mention you to my teachers in my teachers academy sometimes because we talk about that a lot, how like sometimes there's an affective block, when we're trying to speak. It could be a person, it could be a place, it could be a specific project. And there's just so much of speaking that is mental, or emotional as well. So I bring you up all the time. We were checking out your Instagram page the other day and I thought, oh, she did a post on this book that I have this book, right? So I sent you a message because this book, my best friend bought me for I forget if it was my birthday or Christmas. And after I read this book, I was like, I've got to incorporate a lot of these things. And when I saw your post, I thought, Katie, we got to get together. We got to talk about these things. So the first topic I wanted to talk about, kind of you touched on it a little bit, was the idea of like tension and holding patterns, So tell us a little bit about how you feel about it, maybe what the book has to offer on the subject. I know there's exercises and things like that, but yeah, tell us your point of view on that.
I have so many different points of view, and we had a great discussion earlier about ADHD and a million different tangents and places that we could go. So let's see where this goes and see where it flows, because tension and its inhibition of the voice was one of the major reasons that I realized I had to start to go into what was holding people back on a deeper level than mechanics, because I was great at teaching the mechanics of voice, but as many of us are, we're intuitive, we work with something deeper. It's creativity. You can't do the mechanics without the creativity. And so often people get up in their heads and they start thinking about how they should do a certain thing. And in the process, they're so up in their thinking mind and their analytical mind that they somehow disconnect themselves from their body. They're not aware of their posture and their breathing and their presence because they're so focused on what they should be doing mechanically. And suddenly they're in their beta brain waves, which is the analytical, critical part of the brain, the part of the brain that puts a barrier up into any learning or creativity because I should do it this way and it's attachment to outcome, and they get all stuck. And then of course their voice can't function in a free, easy way. So most of us, whether it's teaching accent or spoken voice for actors, a more practical, sometimes primitive voice, or whether it's singing, or whether we're teaching public speakers, I think the principle is the same, that as soon as people get out of their analytical thinking mind and into a state of play and freedom, the tension can start to melt away and they can start to allow themselves to float. I was about to say to drift and float, because those are the words I use when I'm doing hypnosis. They allow themselves to drop into a more intuitive, more free-flowing state. And that's where the brain can learn, because neural pathways can form more easily when you're in more relaxed states. Studies have shown this again and again.
Way faster. The amount of repetition it takes to learn something, let's say a vocabulary word, is drastically reduced if you're having a good time. And I think we all know this, but now we can really back it up with the studies, like you say. And if we're thinking of like language use and learning, this idea of tensions, habitual patterns, like you said, if I learned English as a second language in a school environment, I was kind of traumatized, by a lot of that. It was about grades. It was about red pens. It was about being called out and having to speak in front of my peers who were later going to taunt me. It was probably not a good place for a lot of people. And they carry that with them, right? Now that they're older and they're speaking another language and they're trying to kind of go back and fix some of those fossilized errors, we call them. But it's so hard to let go, of the past. So not even just physically, but mentally.
Yeah, but mentally, I would say absolutely more mentally than physically, because in my experience, the mental then paves the way for the physical. So what you just described about people wanting to go back, you talked about these things fossilizing. That's such an interesting word, because it implies that this stuff is ancient. And in my experience, it's so often, it doesn't even go back to this lifetime. It's often as something that comes back from our ancestors. There's a phrase in the British, in our culture, where they say to a child who's crying, I'll give you something to cry about. And they're saying, you keep crying. And so we've been told, and those parents learned that from their parents and their parents before. And there's so much ancestral baggage to clear up here. So it's interesting that you use the word fossilized. But the lovely thing about it is that, I'm going to unpick that image slightly right now, is that because we now understand so much more about neuroplasticity, we understand that the brain can form new neural pathways, new neural networks. Constantly, we can do that. But when the brain is in the thinking mind, the analytical, the part of the brain that knows that they should make this particular sound to do a certain accent.
And you keep saying should. I gotta stop you, because you keep saying should,
right.
Need to, must, you have to, right? There's so much of that baggage from school, I think, especially. Very few people learned English outside of school. Lucky when they did. But you just keep saying this word, and it keeps not triggering me, but I keep thinking that's mainly the problem,
And isn't it interesting that the word should, and I say this a lot, I used to say this when I was teaching voice as well, isn't it interesting that the word should is so similar to the word shoulders? We carry the shoulds on our shoulders. It's a heaviness of the way other people want us to do things. But what I find really interesting, going back to what you said, I really want to pick up on this topic of how we were all programmed as, no, we weren't all, but many of us were programmed as children to be stuck in the shoulds, to do it a certain way, the red pen, the red marker over the assignment, whatever it was. I'm going to get laughed at, teased by my classmates if I don't speak in a certain way, and all these habits. The reason a lot of people get tense when they use their voice later on, particularly a second language, is because their unconscious mind is usually often trying to protect them by keeping them safe, by making them smaller than they really are.
Yeah, definitely.
It's why so many people get nervous when they speak, when they're about to give a big speech or give a big performance. And it's so interesting that my voice is feeling a bit groggy as I speak into this, because I often notice that my voice responds to the subjects I'm talking about, because energy flows where attention goes. And so often when we think about something, it often manifests itself as a bit of a groggy voice or a bit of tension. If someone talks to you about tension, then it's literally strengthening the neural pathways in the brain that focus on that word, tension. We get what we focus on. And so when I was teaching, this is a lovely tangent, but when I was teaching voice, I started to realize that I needed to start talking about what they wanted, what they desired, instead of what they were doing wrong. Rather than pointing at the tension, I would start to point at the allowing, the spaciousness, the freedom, the play. Because then their unconscious mind would be directed towards the thing I wanted them to do, not towards the unwanted thing.
Exactly. And even this morning, I have this, what we call feedback club, right? So people will come, and if they make a mistake, we're all there. We have like hot seats, right? So somebody takes the hot seat and they are there to be corrected, right? So when they make a mistake, and we always ask, hey, what are you focusing on right now, right? And one person said, hey, I'm focusing on my long I sound, right? So this is a Spanish speaker. And what we mean by that is the E sound, right? So today, one of the words was SKILL. And she said, I'm focusing on my long I sound. And first I thought, and I said, no, you're not. You're focusing on the short I sound, because in Spanish, they say E, right? That's our long I, or long E, however you want to put it. So she was saying skill rather than skill, right? So I said, let's shift that. Instead of you saying you're focusing on your long I, let's say you're focusing on the short I, because every time you think of that long I, guess what you're going to produce? Long I, right? So just this morning, the same thing happened. I think that's kind of illustrating what you're talking about, right?
Absolutely, 100%. It goes through everything. These threads weave their way through everything we do in life. And I'll give you a completely random example. Knowing that the unconscious mind will hear the examples I give, because the unconscious mind's language is storytelling and metaphors and analogies, and the brain naturally fills in the blanks and makes it relevant to other situations. That's why analogies and metaphors work so well. So earlier today, I was cooking a bit of lunch. I was making this kind of, I don't know what it was, a mixture, but it tasted really good. It was a sort of somewhere between sucker and a tortilla and an omelette, and it was just yum. It was yum. And when I used one of those pans that you can fry and then you stick it in the oven to heat up. So I'd taken it out of the oven, I put it back on the hob, it was cooling down, and I was thinking of a memory of when my mum said to me when I was about 10, oh, don't touch that thing I'd just taken out of the oven because it's hot. And I went, okay, yeah, and immediately picked it up. and I had these grill burns on my hand, aged 10 years old. And she looked at me and I looked at her, and I first of all, I went, ow. And then we both laughed at how ridiculous it was that I'd done that. Because she'd not said to me, stay away from that hot thing. She'd said to me, don't pick up that hot thing. And my unconscious mind immediately heard, pick up that hot thing. And I picked it up unconsciously.
We often focus on the nouns, right? Yeah, or the verbs, right? And in this case, I hear touch, I hear that thing, that pan, right? And that's the only thing that I'm hearing. So how many times do we say, don't forget this, rather than, hey, remember?
So simple. And the irony of this, though, the ridiculousness of this, is that as I was looking at that hot pan today at lunchtime, I thought of that memory, and I thought, I must make sure not to touch that hot pan. And immediately I picked the damn thing up, didn't I? And luckily I took my hand away immediately. So my hand is intact to this time. But I just thought, oh my goodness, energy flows where attention goes.
And couple that with patterns and habits, and that is so powerful.
Yeah, so I'm probably going to have to go and see my hypnotherapist now to unpick that pattern and to put a roadblock up in front of those neural pathways and create new neural pathways that have a different habit that says, stay away from hot things.
Right. Yes, exactly. Don't not do the untouching of the thing. Like, it's way too complicated. Just here's what you need. Exactly. And when we said earlier, fossilized errors, that's one of the hardest things that we work on, at least in the population that I work with, is I learned it in school probably. So therefore it's correct, right? Because my teacher taught me. I never learned
Mhm.
it any different. And so my brain thinks it's correct. It's correct to say still when what I'm talking about is still, right? Still. So
Yeah.
correcting that, or I don't know if we want to say correcting, but reconditioning that, forging an alternate
Reconditioning.
path is so difficult, right? It seems to be easier to
Well,
learn something new than try to do that.
well, I'm going to deliberately, lovingly call you out on that story. You're
Okay,
telling
let's hear it.
yourself there. Because when we say, oh, it's so hard to do blank,
Ah.
we're telling our unconscious mind that it's hard to do that thing. Whereas
Mm.
actually, I've started saying to myself, actually, I decide that this gets to be easy.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm doing is I'm training the neurological pathways in my brain. I'm training my whole unconscious mind to recognize that I've decided that this actually gets to be easier than what other people have told me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because so often, and I've done it, I've had other therapist friends who called me out on it and said, Katie, have you noticed that you've just said, oh, it's so hard with this situation because blah, blah, blah. And I've gone, oh
Mm-hmm.
my goodness, how
Yep.
did that one slip under my radar?
Mm-hmm.
We unconsciously give ourselves away all the time.
And maybe that too. Maybe there's another purpose behind our words, like I'm looking for sympathy, right? I'm unconsciously looking for sympathy. Oh, it's so hard. Or maybe I'm empathizing with you as a second language learner because I've also learned other languages. And
Yeah.
because I feel like there's a huge difference between easy and simple, right? We can make something really simple
Yes.
and we can simplify the steps and we can say step 1, step 2, step 3, right? Things can be difficult or easy, and things can be
Yeah.
simple or complex. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, I feel like there's a difference there too sometimes. And recognizing that when I say, hey, it's easy, that also diminishes somebody else's capability, right? If I say, oh, it's so
Yeah.
easy, just do this. Well, it's not easy for them, right? Obviously,
No,
because they're still not able to do it, you know? So I think there's like a slight
absolutely.
difference there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. One person's easy and is another person's challenge. And then,
Absolutely.
yeah, I would also add, though, that there's a temptation by saying to someone, by wanting to empathize with someone, by
Mm,
understanding that it's actually, oh, it's really, really harder for them than it is for someone else.
right.
I sometimes think that empathy is beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't necessarily serve someone as much as compassion does. When we have empathy for someone, we say, oh, it's so hard for you. I know. Yeah, I feel that too. What all you do is
Yeah.
validate the fact that they're finding it hard, which actually doesn't
Mm-hmm.
serve them because it just holds them in that difficult place of, I don't want to say a victim mindset because that's
Right.
way too dramatic for what we're talking about. But, we all have a part of us, an aspect of us that wants to slip into the poor me
Mm-hmm.
identity, no matter
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
how conscious we are of empowering ourselves. I've done it far more recently than I care to admit, slipped into that poor me, that victim mentality, and
Mm-hmm.
recognized that, oh, hang on a minute. It's because actually secretly I want to have someone go, oh, it's okay, Katie, I'll fix it for you. I'll rescue
Ah.
you. So
Uh-huh.
I'm doing my own work, and I'm real
Mhm.
full transparency here right now. I'm doing my own internal work on clearing these unconscious beliefs that I've just discovered within myself that
Mhm.
I want others to fix it for me. Then I'm validated in how difficult I find this thing, rather than
Yeah.
going, actually, no, I'm my own rescuer. I'm going to fix this myself.
Mhm.
And I can ask for support from those around me, but I'm in charge of my own growth, my own learning, my own development in this.
Mhm.
I'm,
Oh yeah. That's a great point. That's a
yeah,
great point. And also what I was thinking of when you said that was like, yeah, it's not super dramatic, these kinds of things, but for us meaning me and my clients and my community, putting things into
mm,
perspective too. It's, hey, there's a
yeah,
reason you're having a hard time with this. Do you know what it is? It's because you don't
yeah.
have that sound in your language, or you
And
have it,
that's,
but it's
yeah.
different. What I'm trying to say is, I guess, saying like, hey, you're struggling, but there's a valid reason for that.
And that takes the
Let's
shame
look.
out.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, totally.
It dissolves any shame around it. Because I think a lot of people, for example, when someone realizes that they're responsible for their own emotions, I think
Mhm.
sometimes people can say, oh, yeah, but I feel like I'm being victim shamed for having these uncomfortable emotions or having this struggle of finding this hard. But actually,
Mhm.
I think it's incredibly empowering when you say you have the power to change this, right? It takes the shame out, it diffuses that emotional charge and says,
Yeah.
okay, fine, it hasn't been easy for you,
Yeah.
but there's also ways you can do it. It's simpler than you realize. Here's
Mhm.
how you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
So, oh gosh, yeah, there's so much loaded up with what we've just said.
Yes, exactly. The emotion blocking it is sometimes the problem. It's not you, it's English. It's the spelling of English. You were never taught
Which is
this. That's not your
ridiculous.
fault. Exactly. I met one client once. The first time I ever met him, he was crying because he said, you know what? I can't say my own name in English. And that's how kind of where he was starting from, this belief
Yeah.
that there was
Yeah.
the should and the right and the correct and whatever. And that was the very first time I ever saw him, right? I forget what his first language was. I think it was Russian at the time. And he was saying how when he was a child, when you lift your tongue and you've got that little thin
Oh,
piece in there, I don't know what the name of that is, piece that kind of holds
they call
onto
it
your
the
tongue. Yeah, so it
tongue.
doesn't go
It's got the
flying away.
tongue tied.
So he
Yeah.
said, but when he was a child, he had extensive speech therapy, and they actually would cut, and it was common practice at the time to cut that little piece under the tongue because the theory was, oh, your tongue can now move freely because it was just so constrained before, and that's why you couldn't speak, small child, correctly. How, like,
Oh,
what
oh my gosh, there are so many things I want to add to this and say, but one thing that's absolutely blaringly obvious is I have a memory of being in the room, in the studio with Kristen Linklater on a voice week that I was doing with her when she was still alive, and up in London. It was at Central School of Speech and Drama, one of the big London drama schools up here. And I was talking about one of my voice students who at the time was tongue-tied and was struggling to make certain sounds. And Kristen just looked me straight in the eye and went, look. And she pointed to her own, and she was tongue-tied.
Really? Wow.
She said, look at this.
Literally tongue-tied.
Literally. And she said, it's not about that. There's other stuff going on. I went, what? I mean, I blushed from head to toe. I was horrified that she'd called me out. But that's the thing. There are belief systems that people have that limit their ability to go further.
Yeah.
And I'm absolutely outright not saying that anyone who's tongue-tied should be able to make those sounds, because everybody's journey is different. But what I do think is important to recognize at the same time is how people's beliefs about certain difficulties can inhibit them more than the difficulty itself, if they're not careful, if they're not aware of it.
And if nothing else, compound it, right? If nothing else, remove that giant boulder that's sitting on your shoulders to like at least make it easier, on yourself. Yeah, absolutely. We're going to switch topics in like 30 seconds, but I'm going to add, I just can't stop because, we banter so much back and forth that it's going to be a long episode, people. But what I wanted to add after you said that thing, first of all, wow, I didn't know that you had met the author of the book in person. That's amazing. I didn't know that. That's really cool.
I got to experience her work firsthand,
That's
which was
cool.
Huge.
That is so cool. But when you mentioned that, I didn't know she was like literally tongue-tied, but that reminded me of something too, is that, here we go with the clearing of the throat, difficult subject. I had a brain tumor about 15 years ago. And you might notice, or maybe you noticed the first time and you forgot, I have a lot of facial paralysis on this side. So I don't have a lot of musculature in my lips, right? So sounds like P or B or M, where you need to use your lips. I had a lot of therapy as well for that, but I still can't really close that all together. So often students, the first time they meet me, they'll say, oh, do you have Bell's palsy? Like they notice at first. Most people forget about it in 10 minutes, but still, like, I had to kind of learn to form sounds. So I know what that's like. And I know that it's a physical thing, yes, but more than anything, it's kind of mental, and think of a ventriloquist. You can't see anything on the outside, but they can still form all the sounds. They find a way, your tone, your musculature. It's like losing one sense. I'm deaf in one ear. Well, I have a pretty good sense of, let's say, smell or something, like we find ways around, I think, some of these things. You know what I mean?
You're absolutely right. We find ways around these things. There's two things I want to say, and hopefully I'll remember both things. The first thing is that I was sat in Kew Gardens in London, beautiful gardens, painting with my aunt, who's an artist, and we would go on these days together. And I opened my box of pastels and went, oh, all my favorite colors are gone. Where are they? Where are they? I've got about 6 colors to work with. And she said, great, you're going to have to work with those colors. And she said, let's see what you get to invent, because you don't have your go-to colors. And I created a piece of art that I never would have created had I not had that limited palette. So that's the first thing I want to say. And the
Nice.
second thing, yes, I remembered, is when I learned hypnotherapy, my teacher, Grace Smith, told a brilliant story. She tells it many times of how when she was first a hypnotherapist, straight out of it, she'd gone straight into, she hadn't even given up her day job at that point. She was still doing that and just doing hypnotherapy on the side. Her then boyfriend, now her husband, his father had recently suffered a stroke, a stress-induced stroke from working. I think he was part of the peacekeeping corps in Afghanistan, so highly stressful. He experienced a very, very, very stressful situation. And in that moment, he thought, this is it, I'm a goner. And he had a stress-induced stroke. His body found a way to black out. That's my interpretation anyway, that his body found a way to make him go to blank out.
Yeah.
And when he came to, he was in the hospital when he came to, and he'd had a stroke and he couldn't move the left side of his body. I think it was the left side. And so Bernardo, Grace's husband, had invited her to the hospital to meet him, having not, I don't think she'd met him before, I don't think so, and do a hypnotherapy session with him. And Grace went, well, I'm not sure what I can do, but I'll see if I can improve his mental state a little bit. It was early days for her. So she just went with what felt right. During the session, it wasn't quite settling because he was clearly not in the right headspace to receive what, we all receive what we're ready for in that given moment, whatever that is. I think it's the same with voice teaching, isn't it? And anyway, she talked him through. She suddenly had this brainwave and she thought, okay, he's a military man. And she talked him through, and I've done similar sessions with hypnosis with helping clients regain neural networks to get their voice working again when they've had muscle tension dysphonia. In this particular experience with him, she had him imagine that he was flying over his brain as if it were a city and he were in a helicopter.
Oh, nice.
So going with military imagery, because the brain's language, the unconscious mind's language is imagery.
Doing some recon, exactly, some surveillance.
Exactly. So you always work with the client's view of the world and help them reframe in their brain. So anyway, what happened is she had him imagine an explosion going off in a building in this dark city, this bang, sending an electrical impulse all the way from the city through his neck, down his arm, into his little finger. And she didn't finish the word finger, and he moved his little finger.
Wow, I'm getting chills. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's taken me a good few years of knowing that story and telling that story before I don't get emotional telling it, because it's so powerful. And in that moment, he suddenly opened his eyes and looked at her and went, "What do I do now?" And she went, just keep wiggling it. Just keep wiggling it. And he did. And then from that, it gave him the recognition that whatever went on biologically, whether his brain formed new neural pathways or whether the blood supply to certain parts of his brain suddenly opened up and improved, because we don't know. All we know is that through the imagery, which is the language of the unconscious, and the unconscious is what influences how we breathe and stand, we unconsciously change our larynx position depending on our emotional state, right? Our unconscious is 95% of our behaviors and habits and action. And so who knows what was going on unconsciously for him, but what happened is it created some kind of connection that got the neural networks lined up so that he could move his finger. And off the back of that, he started to rehabilitate himself and was able to walk again and live a life.
Wow, that's really just, so powerful. The power of our brain. When I had my brain tumor, I had a great neurosurgeon, and he said, look, we don't know what's going to happen. We know more about the surface of the moon than we do about the brain. We are going to do what we know, but we don't know. You could lose language, you could lose memories, you could lose motor function. Just that alone was already terrifying to me. But so one more thing
created a brain, an idea in your brain of what could happen, pointed in the direction of
probably not the best thing to do. But I'm the kind of person, I feel more comfortable, I feel empowered when I know all the possibilities. I actually feel much better when I do know those things, rather than saying everything's going to be fine. That doesn't help me, at all. Personally.
Yeah. I think the trouble is so many doctors talk about what could go wrong, but don't necessarily, not all doctors. I know some doctors who do give you all the possibilities, but actually there are so many cases where people have said to doctors, you know what, I know you've given me that diagnosis, but I know I'm destined for blah, blah, blah. and they have a different outcome because they've decided it for themselves. And I'm not
Yes.
saying that, everyone's responsible for what the
Yeah.
outcome of an operation, because that's a
Right.
ridiculous thing to say. Everyone's in a
Uh-huh.
completely different place. But I think there's so much more than meets the eye when it comes to things like that.
Yeah, we don't know all the power of it.
Sure.
And the other thing, it's perfect that you mentioned breathing and the 95% of like what's behind how we speak, because I want to talk about breathing in a second. But just same session this morning, we were having our hot seats and one person jumped into the hot seat and she wanted to do some spontaneous speaking feedback, right? So instead of having some text that we see, she's like, I'm just going to talk. And when you guys pick up a mistake that I make, just write it in the chat box, right? So that's kind of how we do it. And everybody knows each other there. It's a very supportive group. And so she finishes talking for like 2 minutes, and one person had a note in the chat box that said vocal fry. I'm sure you know there's a lot of debate about vocal fry, especially for women. It's not about that, but she's wonderful. She actually kind of very much embraces it, right? And so we've talked about that. And when we talked about it, the other person wasn't there. So this other person came to the session today and he said, hey, I noticed that normally you vocal fry at the end of your sentences, but today he said, you're like vocal frying all over the place, right? And it was an interesting observation from him because he wasn't there when we discussed her preferred tendency, right? And then we stopped and we said, well, what was she just talking about? Okay, so for the past 2 minutes, she's been talking about how she had the flu for the past 2 weeks, how she hates her job and she wants to quit, and how she needs a vacation. Of course, her voice is going to fry, right? Just the way that the vocal folds vibrate is going to be a little bit different than her normal patterns of speech. You know what I mean? Like literally, that was also
Absolutely.
this morning.
Yeah, and I've noticed that when people apologize for themselves, because when you're creaking, there's not the same vocal fold closure. The air's sort of bubbling through, very slack vocal folds. It's a very, I don't want to use the word disconnected because it's not quite that, but there's a almost less commitment to what you're saying when there's vocal fry.
Yes, you're wavering. I tend to think of it as floppy, right? The vocal folds feel floppy because I feel floppy. I'm bored. I am annoyed a bit. I'm kind of tired sometimes, when I do
And
this.
sometimes hiding. Yeah, exactly. Like you say, feeling that way, sometimes tired, sometimes hiding insecurity by showing a sense of nonchalance.
I don't even care. Exactly. I'm so cool. I don't even care. Like, whatever. Right. I'm just gonna.
Exactly.
There's a
Yeah.
purpose behind it, even if we don't understand, even if we haven't thought about it enough.
Yeah.
And we were talking about the folds and how they get kind of like floppy and how the air is passing through. So this is a perfect time to talk about breathing and
Oh my goodness.
supports, right? Because I think all through the first like 3 chapters, there's a ton of exercises in the book. So let's switch gears and we're going to talk about breathing and support. So what are your thoughts on breathing and support?
So many thoughts. About 20 podcasts worth.
I know, right? We may need to cut this off, guys, and come back to our other topics. We'll see.
We're going to have to, yeah. I would say, and again, it's been a while since I actually taught Linklater in any detail from, directly from her work. But I will say that from what I remember and from what I would teach, as off the back of that, breath takes the path of least resistance. And breath is about allowing rather than imposing your will. She would talk about whether you're imposing your will on your voice. And I think that principle applies to breath specifically. She would talk about whether you are, she wasn't a fan of the engaging. She said, she would get people to allow this tiny, tiny impulse of sound that came from an internal place that was it was called the touch of sound exercise, the pool of vibrations. And she'd have you imagine a diaphragm like this pool that these bubbles would emerge from as just a so gentle that you wouldn't even notice it. And the breath would replace itself. And when you can access that and train your whole system, she didn't use the words nervous system, train the nervous system. But in my opinion, knowing what I now know as a hypnotherapist, it very much is retraining the nervous system to actually allow the voice to come from this deep internal place. And I think it's deep within our psyche. Then it's not about supporting. It's more about, yes, the framework needs to be aligned and supported that way. But actually, I found myself when I was teaching voice, both speech and singing, because I taught both, that I would, rather than talk about breath support, I used to talk about breath management
Ooh,
or
nice.
or breath flow or releasing sound on the out breath. Although you have to be careful with that one because people would then think they need to push more air through than is
Or
actually
hold it
required.
and then kind of explode. Yeah.
Oh, interesting you said about holding your breath, because I was looking through some of my old PDFs and I pulled up a bit here, which is absolutely 100% relevant to one of my clients who I'm working with at the moment. He's come to me with muscle tension dysphonia, and he's noticed something around, and I've noticed this with a few clients, around when we hold the breath. And I happened to come across this phrase that I've got up here. Well, it's a couple of paragraphs actually. And I think this is really relevant to this client and a lot of my clients who I've worked with specifically who've come to me with muscle tension dysphonia. But I think this is relevant to all of us. Can I read it out?
Please, yeah.
Okay, it's a bit long. It's a commentary which comes at the end of an exercise that she's taught. This is directly from her Freeing the Natural Voice book that you were holding earlier. So she says, this has been a long and I hope relaxing session. As you go about your day, pay attention to what's happening in your breathing. Notice the moments when you seem to hold your breath and register what it is that makes you stop breathing. Is it a moment of fear, of boredom, of indecision, of feeling inadequate? Brackets, you are, of course, continuing to breathe, but minimally just under the collarbones. Once you've noticed when you're not breathing, you have the opportunity to breathe consciously in a situation where you may unconsciously be protecting yourself by holding your breath. I can assure you that as you renew your breathing deep in your body, the oxygen that's released into your blood and your brain will enhance your ability to function. And I would go further, personally, to say that when you actually breathe more deeply, you're regulating the nervous system.
Yes. A moment ago when you said, about the nervous system, I was thinking, I think that's the vagus nerve that does that. And it's very autonomic, right? We don't think of controlling it, but through meditation, but through practice, right? We are more easily able to enter a state of relaxation, right? Let's say.
Absolutely. And the state of relaxation, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. The state of relaxation that you can access when you change your breathing then allows you to access the ability to learn faster. It kind of winds back to what we said at the beginning of this podcast. You can learn faster. When you're in these deeper, more relaxed meditative states, meditation is the same state pretty much as hypnosis. You're in exactly the same daydreamy state. And I'm mindful that I don't talk too much about that just in case any listeners are driving. So please, those of you who are listening when you drive, please be mindful and pull over if you need to.
Good thinking.
Yeah, it's really important because you'll hear me, and I make a lot of hypnotherapy audios, and in those audios, you'll usually hear me say at the beginning, please do not listen to this audio while driving. It's so important because even though there's such a thing as highway hypnosis, which is driving trance, we go into a form of trance when we're driving.
Absolutely, yeah. You're on autopilot.
Yeah. I mean, you and I are in a form of trance right now as we talk. There's TV trance. There's just taking a shower, we go into trance. Going for a walk, we go into trance. When we're waking up, when we're going to sleep, all these are brainwave states that we're just dropping into a slightly more daydreamy, deeply relaxed state.
Yeah.
And that's where you have the ability to access deeper ideas that are within your psyche. You have the ability to heal things and resolve patterns and beliefs and wounds that in the unconscious. When you go deep enough, you access a place where you access your higher truth, your deepest self, your real you, which is underneath all those layers of conditioning that, in your words, was fossilized through experiences like school. When you drop into these deeper states, you actually access what I'm talking a lot these days about, your soul voice, about accessing a voice from within you that is just way, way deeper than any of those shoulds. And when you relax, and I use hypnosis to get my clients there, but I do a lot of, like I said to you earlier, my work has got a lot more spiritual, a lot more out there. I do a lot of tuning in with higher guidance, sometimes resolving past life stuff, whether that is ours or someone else's or something we're dipping into collectively. We don't actually know, but for the client, as long as there's resolution, then that's what matters. So when you tap into these deeper, more relaxed states, you have the ability to resolve things. You have the ability to make changes. You also have the ability to learn faster, as you said already.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And actually, the more you relax into these deeply intuitive states, the more you have the ability to access a truthful voice that comes from really within you. And I
Mm.
do believe that when you're learning an accent that isn't necessarily the accent you grew up learning,
Mm.
that you can still use these states to learn those accents faster.
Yes.
Absolutely, without doubt.
And maybe connect with them too, because I think one thing is that, for me in Spanish, for me in French, whatever, it's like there's sometimes where you don't feel connected in that language. You don't feel like how many times have I heard people say, like, when I speak in that language, I don't feel like myself. I can't make the same jokes. I'm not as comfortable, right? I feel
Yeah,
differently. I feel like a teenager, for example. There's so much
absolutely.
that goes on with that too that we have to, well, not we have to, but we can make the experience more, I want to say, kind of authentic to ourselves, because we all have our own
Interesting.
voice, and whatever language, whatever dialect, whatever accent that is, right? We can feel like ourselves with maybe different
Yes.
voices, not just one inner voice, but there's so many, and
Oh, yes.
who knows?
So many. Again, I've got about 3 different things that I want to share with you based on what you've just said. One of them is, okay, just remember the word laugh, and I'll come
Okay.
back to that one.
Okay.
But what I am going to say is that one of my clients who I worked with last year, the last couple of years, just adorable human as an actor,
Mhm.
and he's bilingual. He's half French, half English. I have permission to share, by the way, because he's made some amazing testimonials for me and he's
Oh,
talked about
fantastic.
this work. So I have
Mhm.
permission. I won't divulge the deeper stuff, but what I will share is that for this particular person, and I've seen this happen a few times with clients, is there's an identity. It's about identity. For the unconscious mind, what it recognizes as your identity is how it will make you behave.
Mm.
So if
Mhm.
I decide that I have the identity of someone who eats like a thin person, I'm more likely to eat food that's aligned with being a thin person and lose the
Mhm.
lockdown weight that
Mhm.
kind of
That I've
relatively
still
let
got
go of.
around. Yeah.
Yes, if
It's
I actually use the
2025,
tools that I
remember?
have, I
Yeah.
know. If I actually use the tools that I actually have and know work, I would probably be able to. But I've been focusing on other things.
Right.
But that's the thing, is that where is your intention? And
Mhm.
where is the identity? Who is the identity? So for this person, it was about really coming to terms with his identity as someone who's half French, half English,
Mhm.
and loving both parts of
Mhm.
himself as the
Mhm.
whole complete soul that he is,
Yeah.
knowing that there's the English side and the French side, but they're both part of who he is.
Yeah.
And actually, he came to me originally with a stammer. And what it came down to was it was around this identity piece, around these aspects, and coming to terms with who he is as a person
Mhm.
and celebrating and deeply loving every aspect of
Yeah.
his identity so that he was able, by the way, he knows more than 2 languages. He's just incredible ability to speak languages. And I think this is so relevant to those who are learning accents and characters as
Yeah.
well, whether it's acting or any persona that you're wanting to embody. When you can play in the identity of the accent, it's going to land a
Exactly.
million times faster.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had this when I learned GCSE French. So in England, GCSEs are what you learn up until the age of about 16. So the first level of exams, official exams that become certificates that influence your future, obviously, once you grow up and become mid-40s, you realise that those GCSEs didn't matter half as much as they mattered when you were 16.
Right. Right.
But right, yeah.
It
But
was
for
the end
me
of
at
the
the
world
time,
then. Yeah.
oh my goodness, it really was. For me at the time, I wasn't particularly good at French. I could speak basic GCSE French, but I wasn't
Mhm.
great. But something clicked while I was revising over a weekend. Something in me clicked, and I just started to imitate a French person.
Mhm.
And I just started to speak the French, and it was basic stuff like bonjour, je m'appelle Katie, uh,
Uh-huh.
j'adore le chat, or whatever it was. I love cats, or I don't know what it was I was talking
Uh-huh.
about when I was
Uh-huh.
15. And so I just thought, what if I just walk around I didn't know the word embody at the time,
Mm.
but I use it a lot now. What if I walk around embodying the identity of a French person? Anyway, I walked into the exam for the spoken part, and I was just like, oh, yeah, I'm very French. And I came out with this Frenchness. And the teacher said to me afterwards, that was brilliant. She said, where did that come from? She said, you didn't speak like that in any of the practice sessions. And I said, I don't know, something inside me clicked. Knowing what I now know as a hypnotherapist, I decided to embody the identity of a French person,
Yeah.
at least well enough to give a decent exam. And I got a grade way higher than I was expecting. I think I was predicted a C and I got an A or something like that. It was like, oh, wow. What would be different? This is a hypnotherapist question. What would be different about you when you speak a certain accent if you can embody the character of that accent playfully and joyfully?
Yes, it's so important. And that's why I think why I've decided to go, a lot of people out there, they have course after course after course, right? Video courses that nobody ever finishes. And I've decided to go the other way, which is build community, right? And make that the place where we do everything, because you can't replicate that, right? The things that happen in the session, like that, you can't write that into a lesson plan. And so those are the memorable things. Like being in that space and being in that place, especially as a group together, you've already made a decision. You've already decided, not that I'm going to do this someday, I'm going to be this, but like when I'm here, this is who I am. And then it's easier to transmit, outside of that. And something interesting that I've noticed is I have, for example, sometimes voice actors or regular, let's say screen stage actors who come on and they're amazing. Like the voice actors, like they can switch like that. It's almost like they're a DJ or they're a master mixer and they've got all these levels, that they can tune and they just turn it on suddenly. And then they're doing a narration and then they're doing a commercial and then they're doing this and then and they can just boom, turn it on. And what I've noticed with some of the people that are in my group, they have no acting training, like they're not voice actors at all, but they start doing this thing where they've been there long enough. They get into that, what we call hot seat. They get into the hot seat and they have a different voice. And they don't do it on purpose. They don't say, I'm going to use my hot seat voice. I'm going to use my performance voice or my English voice now. But you can see that people develop this thing. And I think it starts at already deciding to show up. You know what I mean? When I've decided to show up, that's something you can't get in a video course. I believe that if these are the kinds of things that you want for yourself, no app will get you there 100%. No video will get you there 100%. It has to be something where you get feedback from other people and you show up ready to do that already.
Absolutely, yes. And to go a little bit woo-woo for a moment, there's a book by Lynn McTaggart called The Power of Eight. And she's, if I get this right, it's been a while since I listened to the audio version. She talks about, I think she's an investigative journalist, and she looks at ways of understanding scientifically what's actually going on with all this stuff that we cannot explain yet with standard science as we know it. And she talks about this phenomenon where when people gather with a group of, usually around 8 seems to be a number that's really effective, is that something mysterious happens and the shifts start to compound. There's something really, really mysterious that happens when you get a group that come together for the work. And they talk these days, is it about, what's the experiment they did where is it a molecule that they cut in half? Whoever they are, cut the molecule in half and put one half down a fiber optic cable 7 feet and the other half of the molecule down a fiber optic cable 7 feet. So 14, I think 14 feet, or maybe it was meters. It was it was 14 of something.
For a molecule, that's a long way, yeah.
That's a really long way for a molecule. Yeah, so half a molecule. And what they did is they influenced the state of one half of the molecule and the other half of the molecule in exact time, in real time, responded in exactly the same way.
Wow.
Even though the two were separated by distance. And it wasn't a knock-on effect that the second one responded with a delay of half a second or however long. It was instantaneous. So there's something that we're beginning to understand about the connections between people, whether we're on Zoom or actually in the room. I believe that the connections and the breakthroughs that people happen when they meet in a group, I think there's enormous power in that.
There's intention there. Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're describing too reminds me of Einstein And I think he called it spooky action at a distance. And we're talking cosmic
Yeah.
distances, right? And now we're talking about like living beings and how distance
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily matter, right? And like you were saying, form. Oh, here I only see Katie on a screen. If I walk behind the camera, she's not there, right? But I still feel your warmth and I feel your humor. You know, how is that even possible?
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing how we all maybe not conform, but we pick up on each other, right? And we have this thing about socializing and the fact that we want to kind of coalesce in a way.
Absolutely, we do. We have this innate desire to coalesce, form something and create. I think we have to be mindful these days that we're only really designed to know a small number of people from our tribe or village. And these days there's access to so much. I think that's why so many people get overwhelmed so easily. I think that's where it's so important to be present in the present moment with the groups that you are with, rather than looking at that and looking at that and looking at that and say, right, I'm here, I'm now, this is where I'm at, this is what I commit to. And maybe I'm talking to myself as I say this, because this is advice. I'm still reminding myself that it's worth hearing, and I'm getting better and better at this, calling myself out on my own habits and beliefs. Because I believe that if I'm going to call my clients out on stuff, I'd call myself out too.
Yeah.
But you're right, there is this desire for connection, and I believe that the connection happens on so many layers, not just visual, not just auditory, but there's something mysterious and something deeper that happens when we connect in this way, for sure.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. What you were saying just now is so telling too, right? We spend so much time on our phones, and that's very different, right? We're so lonely. A lot of us are feeling more lonely, even though we're seeing more people on a screen, but it's a very one-way relationship. So we're scrolling, dopamine's going up, right? That drug, well, not that drug, that chemical we get from connection, the oxytocin, I think it's oxytocin, is going down, down, down. So we have way too much dopamine. We don't have nearly enough oxytocin from meeting people, right? And I feel like that's not good for us. How can it be good for us? You know, we're used to, like you said, smaller tribes, contact, seeing somebody as a surprise. It should be a delight, you know, it should be helpful to us. We should be coming together to form bigger and better things, you know, and not just distractions, I think.
Yeah, not just distractions. I honestly believe that if you want to communicate effectively, then you have to learn to be present. You have to learn to be in the here and now. I think this winds round to one more thing I want to say about breath, about breathing. And I used to say this to my voice students when I was teaching voice, is that, isn't it interesting that the word inspiration, breathing in, also means to have an idea? And when we have an idea, the idea drops into our body, lands, as Linklater would say, on the dome of the diaphragm as it flattens and pulls the air in. And then on the out breath, out comes the thought, out comes the idea. And when we're very activated and we've got a lot of ideas flowing, our breath tends to be quite... And I've noticed it in myself and thought, oh, why am I doing so many short, sharp breaths? Is it because I've got a lot to say and I'm really excited about it? Or is there something that I need to just relax a little bit so that the inspiration can drop in more? Maybe I need to be more present. But I just think that's something really interesting to speak into about breath. And about relaxation and about inspiration.
Yes, and think about it. Even when we have an idea, what do we call it? We call it the aha moment, right? Aha. Oh, there's a little this, a little of that, right? Yes, like you have to kind of take it in and you have to do something with that, you know? Like that's what it reminded me of when you just said that too. The aspect of breathing, of the feelings, the emotions, like the physical feelings, the mental blockages, maybe all this stuff is hyper related. And most people, they think, if we're talking about accent, right? Oh, I need to sound more American. Oh, I need to sound more natural, right? And they work on the mechanics first, right? Because that's the part you can see. That's the easiest thing. But really, we got to think about from the beginning, the breathing, you know, and the idea of the depth and the brain waves that it's going to change so that we're in the right kind of place for that. And I think, like we said, compounding that by doing something together is going to make it so much better because it's easier to play, I think, right? It's easier to laugh. when somebody else says,
Yeah.
you don't have to think of all the jokes when you're all alone, right? And it's weird to look at yourself
No.
all alone. So when you're in a group, one person can make a joke
Yeah.
and six people get to laugh about it. So it's easier to have a good time, I
Absolutely.
think.
Absolutely easier. So much easier. And to add to what you just said, identity. Who we believe ourselves to be and who we believe that we get to be will
Yes.
influence the way we behave and the way we speak, the way we sing, the way we hold ourselves, what truths we're embodying. Are we embodying our own truth? There's so much around identity as
Oh, yeah.
well.
Actually, to ending note, promise, ending note is it's funny that you say identity because I don't know if you've heard this kind of framework before, but we often say that there's 4 P's to accent, right? We'll say pronunciation, that's going to be the mechanics, the prosody, the music of the language, the rhythm, the intonation,
Oh,
stuff like that, right? The
yes, yes.
posture, the oral posture. What are my patterns of language 1 or accent 1 versus language 2 or accent 2, right? What are my muscles used to doing for so many years? And then last one,
Right.
personality, right? Or personhood. So, hello. I feel like we've kind of discussed all of those things today, but on a
So,
very different level, at a very different vibration, we could say.
yeah, totally different level,
Mhm.
totally different vibration. And
Yeah,
yet it's just all so connected.
exactly. You could have one without the others, right? But maybe you're spinning your wheels or you're not doing yourself justice by opening up to like other possibilities or other maybe ways you could be more effective, and you could be happier by thinking about these things too.
Absolutely. It is holistic in that
Hmm.
respect. It's the
Hmm.
whole, you know.
Exactly. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
totally.
So speaking of all the holistic stuff, speaking of all the
Oh,
connections and things like that, how can we connect with you? And what is it that we can learn more from you? And how would we do that?
oh, I'd say right now the best place to access me is via my website, which is
Hmm.
www.katiecrooks.com. Katie with an IE and crooks
Hmm.
like crooks and robbers. And when you go onto the website, you'll notice, and at the time of recording this, the audio that's up there right now is called Prepare for a Powerful Performance.
Hmm.
Because everyone loves an alliteration, right? And if you want to download it, you'll get that for free.
Hmm.
I'd recommend actually when you go in there, make sure the box is ticked for the email list.
Or
Because then
checked for
you'll,
those of us who speak American
oh,
English. Maybe
sorry,
not
checked,
ticked, but no, I'm just
yes.
kidding. I'm kidding. I'm
Ticked,
kidding.
checked, filled in. Fill in the boxy thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Tap
when
that
you
little
do,
box. Hmm.
tap that little box and make sure that you're subscribed because then you're going to get access to other things because I have a monumental library of hypnotherapy audios specifically for voice users
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
it's how I started out. My first ever program I created, I massively delivered over lockdown. I call them hypno hybrids, where we integrate hypnosis and voice work. And I think in there somewhere is a process that I created, which is hypnosis and integrating Linklaters voice work
Ah,
specifically.
nice, nice, nice.
So when you become part of my world, you can email me and say, Katie, how do I get that audio? I need it.
Exactly. Or yeah, like you said, at the time of recording right now, it's March 2025. Maybe you'll, spice things up, change things around. But if
Yeah.
somebody just heard that, they're listening to this podcast episode later and they say, oh, but you said there was this one. Can I still get that one? They could just email you, right? And then ask
Email
you.
me. Yeah. I'll
Hmm.
fish out the link. Yeah. Because yeah, there's change all the time and I'm improving these things all the time. But yeah, you can email me for the link.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you're on Instagram, find me on the Artist's Hypnotherapist.
Yes, I love that. I love that because also, so we were talking about this book today, ta-da, Freeing the Natural Voice by Kristen Linklater. And I found that for language work, there's so much untapped material that's related to acting, that's related to performance, artistry in general. Look at I'm sure you know the book, The Artist's Way, right? I feel like
Oh,
that alone,
yeah.
it's not designed for language, but if you could take that and you could make it into language learning, some of the best books that I've read
Totally.
as a teacher were acting
Yeah.
books, right? Because so much of teaching is
Absolutely.
performance and so much of kind of livings can sometimes feel like a performance, And so I think,
It's all,
yeah.
yeah, it's all tapping into different psyches, different versions of ourselves. We haven't even talked about archetypes, but that's a whole other podcast that we could go into.
We have a list of episodes.
25 podcasts? How many?
Exactly. And counting. Exactly. The only problem you and I have is like scheduling, I think. So the first thing is we have more to talk about for the book because we have 2 of our 4 topics done. So that's the next thing we're going to get together and talk about. And then we mentioned something else. We said, oh, that's another podcast. We already have another one because, yeah, a lot of people would not think of combining these 2 ideas, language and hypnotherapy, or language and altered states or brainwaves. But guys, once you hear this stuff, like, you can't unhear it, and you can't realize that that, like, yes,
Two are
they
so
impact each
connected.
other, and so
Massively.
yeah, like, we have to get together again. But for now, we can say thanks to the audience for listening today.
Thank you for
And
listening, folks.
yes, and we hope to see you again for the next episode, or hear you. And so, yeah, we'll say thanks to the audience, and I'll say thank you so much, Katie, for coming on today to talk about this thing so passionately. I know you love it, and I know I love it, and I don't have a lot of people to talk to about this stuff. So,
How can
yay!
you tell? Oh, thank you.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks for listening all the way to the end, everybody. I hope that you found these 2 topics really helpful, because the first one, tension and habitual holding patterns, this is important because many language learners unconsciously hold tension in our articulators, our jaw, our tongue, or our throat, for example, due to just the oral posture of the first language. And then number 2, breath and support, because any sounds in any language are going to start with breathing. Can't have sounds without breathing. And in the book, Linklater has exercises for freeing the breath, which can help you improve your voice projection and sustain sounds that might not even exist in your first language. And when you listen all the way to the end, I like to tell you a little something extra about myself. And we were speaking about language and our unconscious patterns, and I was remembering, but I didn't bring it up at the time. I was remembering that for me in French, I learned French in high school, right? But that was French in high school. And what I really learned was when I went on an exchange for a year in France. And then I learned French really well because I was in a tiny town. But then later in life, I realized that my French language had kind of gotten stuck in time. And whenever I spoke French as an adult, that my vocabularies, my mannerisms, that I just sounded like a 16-year-old girl still, even in my 30s. And I realized that when I spoke French as an adult, I didn't really feel like me anymore because I had changed. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that our language growth is affected by so many things we don't even notice. And also, I realized that we're really never done learning language because we're kind of not done, right? So I think this is an amazing topic. And if you have a specific topic about accents and pronunciation that you'd like to hear, let me know and I'll try to make it a reality. And I'll see you in the next episode.